Right, a very warm welcome to you on a slightly drizzly morning. I hope everyone has got their cup of tea, coffee, and water, and all very comfortable. And so just to say a warm welcome again. This is an HR committee event, and this is the first series of the event we are running on Internet of Things. And we're very, very happy to have Jonathan and Matthew to come here to speak to us about the future of work. I remember many years ago when I started work, that was very different. The fax, everything was done by fax, and obviously now is very, very different. And Matthew and Jonathan are going to tell us, how business could be done differently with the Internet of Things. Very, very quick mention of a few things. Obviously, you will see people with different badges, and some have got red color badges, the governors of the AmCham here. Blue badges means that you are a committee of the AmCham, so I'm an HR committee member, Jonathan is as well. And also we might see some of us who have the blue dots, and those are members as well. And if you don't have any of these, that means that you are probably not yet an AmCham member. And we very much look forward to having you joining AmCham so that you can take part in one or more of the many committees that we have here. Today we're going to talk about the future of works, and Matthew and Jonathan are all very experienced people who will tell us how they going to help business drive forward in terms of using internet. Jonathan is from Tower Watson's, and I know from speaking to people within his organisation that he really helps HR to use internet and use computer to drive business. So, very experienced person. And Matthew obviously has a wealth of experience, having worked in different regions of the world. And I had a chat with him. He has worked on in really different parts of the world. I think in the Middle East and in Asia, obviously, and also in America. Is that? Yes, that's right. So, lived different parts of the world. The way things work is very different now from compared with what happened in the past. So, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Matthew and Jonathan.
Thank you very much. I'll use the microphone. I'll stand up and talk if that's okay. I think I speak better standing up. My wife would probably tell you I listen better speaking as well. Really what I'm going to talk about today is a little bit about how society is digitizing and the change and how that is affecting the future of work, how we're going to see different things specifically over the next 5 to 10 years. So, the world is changing. It's no secret that the emerging economies and the emerged economies are coming together. And so we're seeing a lot more development, specifically in the Asia environment, around real estate, around manufacturing, et cetera, et cetera. But there's also this huge push towards environmental awareness, because with the world's population growing as it is, the demands for energy are going to go up by, as you can see, 40% by 2030, which means obviously we'll have to do things in a much more smarter, leaner, and more efficient way. And there's also the economies of the world as well. And at Cisco, we've kind of bucketed them into 3 major areas. It's the aging, shrinking, and the hyper-growth world. So as you can see from a lot of these figures, China is aging, and significantly, and so this is going to affect a lot of the functions that are required in society. 10% of the Chinese population, which is more than 100 million people, are diabetics. So this is going to have a long-term drain on health costs and the way people do things. And then we also have the shrinking world as well. So Japan aging, but Japan also aging and shrinking. Europe also shrinking as well. Germany, in order just to maintain the present standards of living, they're going to have to see 5% productivity, not GDP, but productivity improvements every year, just to maintain where their society is at the moment. And so when you hear all of these announcements about Germany 4.0, about how they're revamping their manufacturing, about how they're digitizing, they're doing that for a reason, because they have to become a lot more efficient, because there'll be less people paying taxes. And so they have to be a lot more profitable in order to care for the elderly. And then, of course, we've got a hyper-growth world. Again, look at a lot of these countries. I spent a couple of years in India, and at the moment, only 30% urbanized. That's going to go over the next 25 years to 50% urbanized, which means the size of the cities is going to double. There's about 400 million people living in cities today, but just because of the population growth, that's going to grow to 800 million people So think about the demands on services, the demands on electricity, the demands on telephony, all of these different demands. And not only is the world, and a lot of the changes that we're seeing here today. I mean, look at the requirements now of the emerging and the emerged world, and look at the differences in the skill sets. I mean, a lot of these are relatively shocking to see, but I'll pull out, for instance, in the emerging countries, 58 million surplus of low-skilled workers in emerging markets. So there's this drive within emerging countries to actually say, like, make in India, let's do more manufacturing. But when you look at the new industries of today, take Tesla as an example, making very, very high-tech motor cars, but their manufacturing plant, they decided to set it up in the most expensive state, California, in one of the most expensive countries of the world, simply because they don't need low-skilled workers. They need high-tech workers, IT-orientated workers, in order to service effectively a robotic plant. So we're going to see a lot of changes in how these skill sets map and a lot of the training requirements that are required just to keep up in this digital world. And it is going to be this. There's going to be a lot of new value and productivity improvements required. We're going to have to do a lot around skills mismatch. And then also, as I mentioned earlier, access to healthcare and education is going to be key. Specifically in the hyper-growth world, where 1 in 4 workers, they say, in 15 years will be from India, simply because people are getting younger there and they're putting so many people into the workplace. When I went to join Cisco 15 years ago, we only had 30 people in Bangalore. Now we have 12,000. And we didn't go there for cost of labor arbitrage. We went there because that's where most of the engineers were graduating. And so we went there for access to talent. So again, a lot of these different skills mismatches. But not only is the world changing population-wise, it's also becoming more connected. It's the connection of all of these different things that are starting to drive different ways of doing things. An interesting figure, but when Cisco was born in 1984, there were only 3,000 devices connected to the internet. And remember that 1984 and 3,000, because it's significant. Because the world went through this tipping point in 2008, when the number of devices connected devices equal the number of people on the planet. So from 1984 to 2008, but then just in the last 7 years, that's doubled again. So 15 billion devices connected. In the next 5 years, that's going to more than triple, to more than 50 billion connected devices. And this is a change that's happening 5 times faster than the adoption of telephony, 5 times faster than the adoption of electricity. And that's just things connected to the internet. It doesn't mean sensors as well. So sensors are going to be very important. You look around, you see the thermostats, you see the lighting sensors, all of these different things. The price of sensors is dropping so much that it's much cheaper now to have digital sensors. So in 2012, they shipped 2 billion sensors. 2013, 8 billion. Last year, 24 billion sensors. So with all of these sensors and all of these different things, what we're finding is looking at what we call the 4th phase of the internet. The first phase was just about connecting things. So this is the 3,000 devices. The second phase was really about e-commerce. And that's where Cisco made all of their money, connecting business machines. That's when you talked earlier, Anita, about faxes. It's when faxes went to email. We started to see billing from e-commerce. And then, of course, we had the third phase, which is what we call the digitization of society. Now, I was talking to a few people this morning. It's amazing what people will put on Facebook these days. So, we talk a lot about privacy, but sometimes, you give up the right to privacy for convenience. And now we're talking about the 4th phase of the internet. And we think this is probably going to be 5 times larger to 10 times larger than everything you've seen before in the internet. And it's extremely difficult to imagine, but it's the connection of these sensors, the connection of these devices, really the connection of people, process, data, and things. So creating what we're calling the Internet of Everything. And through that, of course, we're getting a lot of data. There's a lot of stats up here. The one I like is Walmart collects 2.5 petabytes of customer data every hour. I'm in IT. I had to look up petabyte as well. And if you think of a petabyte in MP3 music, if you were to listen to 1 petabyte of MP3 music, you'd be listening to it for 2,000 years. So it's just data, and so data, without some sort of actionable intelligence, just stays as data. So when you start to think a lot more about analytics and how that is very key, that's when data becomes information, information becomes knowledge, and then knowledge becomes actionable outcomes. So it's what you then do with those outcomes which is going to be very important, and how that affects how we do everything at work. I spoke to a gentleman called John Scully. I'm not sure if anybody's heard of him. He used to be the CEO of Apple, very famous for firing Steve Jobs. But he was also the CEO of PepsiCo for a number of years. And he's investing very, very heavily in this Internet of Everything. And one of the comments that he made when I was talking to him was that all of this data, combined with all of this analytics, is going to be the death of middle management. Because at the moment, you need a lot of middle management who are there to analyze the data. And generally in large corporations, for those of you who work in large corporations, those are the people that say no. Because it's easy to say no. And so with all of this data, with all of this actionable intelligence, this type of role is going to go away. And we're moving very much to this web-based app world. So we've gone from web pages, and now we've gone to applications. And the key thing about applications to remember is that number there. 1984, when Cisco was born, only 3,000 devices connected to the internet. 2007, only 3,000 mobile applications. And think how quickly those mobile applications are growing. You can see the numbers that they are today, but there were 77 billion downloads of mobile apps. And it's these applications that are starting to become connected to the other applications and other applications which are actually creating this actionable intelligence, which is actually going to change the future of work. Because it's the way that you do things. The average person spends 2 hours every day on apps. And that's us, reading the BBC, reading CNN, looking at different things. You know, teenagers, they've only got 2 states of mind. They're either asleep or they're online. You know, these people coming into the workplace look at things in completely different ways. And when you start to think about this, it's going to be about the pace of change and digital disruption. Because think about these different apps and think about all of this data that's out there. At the moment, who has one of those Fitbit things that they wear on their wrist? Anybody going to own up? There you go. So, you know, you can connect it to your scales these days as well, and you get really interesting information. But when that gets connected to your supermarket, and it gets connected to your doctor, all of these data streams are going to give all of these different areas of things to do. Your doctor will be able to see how you're doing on a daily basis. They'll be able to see what you're eating. And they'll be able to give you health care for a change instead of sick care. So again, this is going to change the way that a lot of people work. If you go to the average doctors these days, you don't actually go to get the diagnosis because you've already got it before you go in from Google. Where you go is for a chat and, you know, a bit of reassurance and all of those different things. But then ultimately, of course, all of that information will be connected to the insurance company. And the insurance company will be able to give you dynamic pricing. And think of the job of insurance actuary. Disappeared. So the insurance company will know what you're eating, what you're buying from the supermarket, what your heart rate is on a momentary basis, whether you're accepting your doctor's devices. And if you do everything that everybody says, your insurance is going to go down. But then, of course, you have the option to opt out. Now, a lot of people of our ages are kind of prisoners of our own experience. They talk about, well, I don't want to share that in case somebody sees it. Sharing and convenience will always overtake security. You know, the average 26-year-old would rather have an iPhone than a car. And the reason being, of course, is when we were all growing up, a car was our network. You know, if you were going to meet somebody at 9 o'clock, you got there at 9 o'clock because you couldn't call them, you didn't have a mobile phone, you couldn't text them, and you drove there in your car. These days, things have digitized. So with this growing population, things are going to move in different ways. And one great example of this digital disruption, because companies that are going to be disrupted, only the profitable parts of your business will be disrupted. Think about Uber. Here's a company over the last 6 years with 1,000 spotty kids in the Bay Area that's gone from zero in value to $40 billion of market capitalization. They have no assets. They just have software. And they managed to disrupt a whole industry. And again, look at that with no assets, $40 billion in market cap. That's the combination of Hertz, UPS, United Airlines, all together. And think about how many assets and planes and employees they have. So this digital disruption and this sharing economy is going to disrupt a lot of things. Probably the first to go, as we all know, was Kodak. They missed that transition. But who's going to go next? Because Uber probably managed to do the only thing that nobody else has done before, was unite Europe in hatred of Uber. But when you think about that, of course, the taxi drivers and the black cab drivers in London who are saying, well, this is putting me out, this is not necessarily putting me out of a job, but reducing my income, because I've spent all of this time studying the knowledge or doing all of those things. By 2025, driverless cars will be commonplace. By 2030, they'll be ubiquitous. If you have 9,000 driverless Uber cabs in New York City, you'll have to wait 38 seconds, and it'll be 50 cents a mile. So never mind the disruption of the taxi drivers, their job is going to go away. It just won't be required anymore, because convenience, safety, all of these different things are going to change the way we do things. And this is a huge opportunity, because only 1% of what can be connected is connected. So we're seeing that just with 62 use cases, over the next 10 years, creating $19 trillion of new economic value. And this is in these things at the bottom, as you can see. Innovation, asset utilization, knowing where things are is huge. Because if you know where things are, you know what their maintenance contracts is, what you can do with them, all of these different things. So again, it's going to be a completely different shift in how we look at things today. It's not necessarily going to be about having more jobs for more productivity. And GDP measured the traditional way, which is effectively an output and brought up when we used to do farming for a living. Because we believe that it's a city, a country, a building, even yourself. And I know it sounds disgusting, but in about 5 or 6 years, you'll be able to lick your iPhone and get a DNA profile. So all of these things are going to be connected, and it's going to create lots of different opportunities. Because when you start connecting hospitals to ambulances, to traffic lights, to all of these different things, I met with a big property developer yesterday in Hong Kong, and they're very much already thinking about building new buildings in China. Because driverless cars are coming, what is their long-term plan for their parking spaces? How are they going to collect all of the data and make good use out of it from using applications within stores? So people are thinking about this, because all of these calculations, the risk of actually missing this is a huge. We're predicting that probably 25% of Fortune 500 companies, similar to Kodak, will fail in the next 10 years. Which is a huge number to think about. But it's not unrealistic, because these companies are going to miss these market transitions, doing the right thing for too long. It's so easy to be sort of fat, dumb, and happy because you're making lots of cash. But digital disruptors will look at those parts of the industry. They're not going to disrupt the unprofitable parts of your businesses. They're going to disrupt the profitable parts. So there's going to be a constant need to reinvent business, reinvent skill sets, and look at how you do things differently. And of course, we have to be a lot more customer-driven these days as well. When you go into an Apple store, they don't make you go to a checkout counter to get your goods. They'll check you out right where you are, because they want things to be convenient for you. And isn't that a much nicer experience? But then you have to take that to all the different ways of doing things. At Cisco now, when I joined, we used to have 3- and 5-year business plans. We've thrown all of those out of the window now. Now we just have customer plans. Because technology and things are moving so quickly. It used to be 3 to 5 years for a technology transition. Now it's 12 to 24 months. So you have to focus more on the customers and being more attentive to your customers than anything else. Because if you lose sight of your customers, you'll be disrupted extremely quickly. We now think it's about exponential thinking, not linear thinking. And it's going to be no fear of failure. Because of all of this information, we're going to have to do lots of different things very, very quickly. If you do one thing, you have a 5% chance of success. If you do 30 things, maybe a 50% chance of success. If you do 50 things, maybe a 90% chance of success. But 45 of those things will fail. So it's going to be about rapid prototyping, co-innovation, working with lots of different partners that you've never worked with before. At Cisco, we couldn't spell Schneider 5 years ago, and now we're working with Schneider, Honeywell, business services companies. Partnerships and how you deal with these things are really going to be about the future of work. But now I'm going to hand over to Jonathan to take us into a bit more detail about what that means from really an HR perspective.
Thank you, Matthew. Could be quite a hard act to follow, I guess. So for me, kind of giving you another lens after the nice kind of backdrop that Matthew's given you, I think a lot of us, are so bombarded these days in terms of digital age. Like hands up, who isn't in terms of the emails traffic that we're getting, and there's just a lot of information and data that is just killing us. But the rapid pace of change that we're going through, if we're not careful, we all could be obsolete. So in terms of our role as individuals, how do we revamp ourselves? The corporations we serve to ensure that doesn't end up like a Kodak or a Nokia or a Borders. There was just so many of these potential Fortune 20, kind of Fortune 500 companies. What I want to kind of take you through is from a lens of kind of implications of HR, how is that being revamped? And I've got some, hopefully quite interesting kind of stats to kind of share with you along the way. We do have to rethink in terms of the future of work, what it means for us. The way that certain tasks is being kind of accomplished, rethinking how we do work. I've got a good friend of mine that has headed up a trading firm in China. And so he's also one of my neighbors, so we hang out together quite a bit. So he's one of the largest trading, kind of organizations within China, based in Shenzhen. And basically he's got a team of, 50, 60 developers. All they do is, by day, algorithmic trading, and they do futures. And so actually the future of work for them is programming all the algorithmic stuff in the system. When that comes to actual trade, because of speed of light, everything is all Internet of Everything. He does minimal interventions. Programs just run throughout the day. And so all of us would know in the past, kind of couple of weeks have been very, very turbulent in China, around the world, Hong Kong stock market. He makes a lot when there's market volatility. But the future of work for them, they don't have workers doing traders. The traders are absolutely obsolete. They've just got fine-tuning of algorithms. He spends his time fine-tuning and thinking ahead, what is the next thing to ensure the right controls are in place in order to make sure the trades get executed flawlessly. Reshaping environment engages, enables, and energizes. I guess what is the environment that works in terms of, what is the employment kind of value proposition for employees? What do you do to offer? That links in pretty well with the virtual workplace. I think with Cisco and the virtual desktops and stuff like that we use, people now expect that through work and home, the work-life flexibility and balance, you should be able to do almost exactly the same thing replicated at home. Now, the reskilling part is one that it's going to be absolutely essential. You've got folks coming straight out of universities where this is basically the normal for them. You've got us having gone through generations, another 1 or 2 generations of the change. We need absolutely to reskill. So our company's investing more heavily in training, development, etc. But the real training and investment, I'm going to go through the next kind of couple of slides, are the skills that's going to be very important for us to flourish or survive in the new digital age. The way we do talent sourcing. I mean, Matthew, you raised an example where India, from very few to no persons to 12,000 strong now, where do we basically source our talent now, where the world I would consider is becoming flatter and flatter and more competitive along the way? So some of these skills, some would resonate more than others, but we did some research in terms of what skills would be most essential in terms of competing. Global skills, not a surprise in terms of all the different kind of languages, but I would argue digital skills is also a new language that we need to embrace. The way we use digital in terms of interacting, conducting business, this is a relatively new phenomenon, and I think a lot of businesses are not adept yet to really develop that digital business skills. The agile thinking, this is where the money is in terms of our ability to deal with ambiguity and complexity. I think with there's so much grey now in the world. I think if you were trying to make it into a binary form, we won't be able to survive. The world is just not binary. There's a lot of complexity and ambiguity. And so the management that can survive this in terms of the digital age are the ones that are able to deal with complexity and ambiguity quite well. seeing the big picture in terms of the macro view, and of course the way you build relationships in a more kind of collaborative sense, in a digital kind of collaboration and co-create and brainstorm. These are some of the skills that I think will be relevant for people coming out of university, but more so our current role in terms of how those applies in different ways, shape or form. Now, what does it really mean now? Matthew took us through, and I like almost the hierarchy of the wisdom, the actionable kind of intelligence. Last year about October, we had a Towers Watson kind of a Singapore conference, and we had also a guest speaker. And I think the problem now with a lot of corporations, and you may feel the same, is we talk a lot about either the logistics, data kind of analytics, or we say, well, actionable wisdom or big data. But a lot of firms are struggling even with small data. They're getting so bombarded with so much data, they don't know what to do with it. They're almost like paralyzed by the number of data that they are trying to work through. And you try to be greedy and say, well, that means a lot of different things to me, but what can I do with it in terms of actionable kind of decisions? And so we serve a client or the internal business. We try to steer them and navigate and coach them along the way, but we are also so overwhelmed that we don't know what to do sometimes, right? The segmentation, so it's going to be very, very important. So the way you manage talent, the way, offering that consumer experience in terms of different talent segments, that's going to be important. So for example, when you have a one-stop shop in terms of your portal at work, so the employee wants to look up stuff about their medical plans, they want to have a HR query or an IT query, they should go to a portal of some sort. Do you segment and differentiate based on, are they a hypo? Are they a senior management? Do you offer them different information in terms of their profile? Because you've stored a lot of data about them. So they should go in, and because they're a line manager, they should see some more pertinent dashboards relevant to them as a manager. So do you do that talent segmentation? And of course, there are a lot of, in this age, especially within financial services, for example, there's a lot of regulatory scrutiny on compliance, data privacy, etc. That I think that's going to be quite pertinent. What about the HR risk? What are you going to do in terms of risk leverage? Integrated views and synergy, that's going to be important. No longer is HR just on a silo. HR, I think, has earned its seat in the round table in terms of the senior leadership. So with that kind of position comes also great accountability to integrate and develop and demonstrate synergy and benefits. Optimization, I think we're going to talk a little bit more about the optimization landscape. I think I would consider Hong Kong has always prided itself on being a very efficient city. Everyone's got octopus, etc., beat, you're out, etc. But I think more and more we're challenged that are we also effective in terms of the way we conduct ourselves, the way we run our business, etc. And I think there's a lot of optimization opportunities. And so from the last kind of couple of years, Hong Kong's been, from our kind of look at it in terms of HR investments, it's been, not very significant. But the last 2 years, it's been on a significant kind of uptake in terms of how much investments companies in Hong Kong, multinationals or local, are willing to make. So here comes our, what we do annually in terms of our service delivery and technology survey. We've done this now for 17, 18 years in the Americas. In Asia Pacific, this is our second year of doing it. And what it is, these are some of the basically Asia Pacific kind of highlights at a glance. So we are seeing almost 40% are looking to change their structure. So they may be looking at the operating model, looking at how they regroup or restructure in order to serve the needs of the business a little bit better. 85% or more will spend the same or more on HR technology. So that constant is actually quite a good thing. Over 30% will replace the core HR system this year, which is really an all-time high. The Hong Kong statistics actually stack up rather favorably against this. Over 60% provide a one-stop shop or your online employee portal for your employees. Over 20% will replace the existing on-premise or ERP solutions with a cloud or SaaS solution. So you're seeing in Asia Pacific that rapid adoption of SaaS or cloud. Now, against the other regions, this is where it gets a bit interesting. Overall, 46% are using or planning to use mobile technology. Against the other regions, America's, of course, no surprise, leading the charge, almost 80%. EMEA, of course, 64. Asia Pacific has climbed up quite significantly from 36% last year, up another 10%. So there are a lot of emphasis in terms of, I think, what the business would demand. Everyone's time poor, they've got their iPhone or whatever mobile devices, they expect to be able to use an app to go in and do that stuff. And if you are seeing some of the leading applications like a SuccessFactors or a Workday, you can do expenses, submissions, scans, right through, and it's using mobile technology. So that's really rapidly shaping the way we work in terms of doing HR work. And yes, correct, I think the business, the line manager, are now doing a lot more of the work that HR would typically do. And also, in terms of being obsolete, if this thing continues to transform itself in terms of the new way of HR, a lot of HR middle management will also be obsolete, unfortunately. So we need to continue kind of think about what it means for HR practitioners. On the priority curve, number 2 was improving line manager effectiveness. We find a lot of corporations, the line managers are not yet equipped in terms of doing HR. How do you have a difficult conversation at year-end with your staff? Or how do you explain your total rewards kind of philosophy or work-life flexibility? What is that proposition? Line managers are not, and they really shouldn't be. This is a recent phenomenon where they're actually taken more on in terms of their HR kind of management skills. That's rated as the second most important priority. HR is the operator, HR is also the project leader. So you're kind of splitting your time between the two, your left brain, right brain, but two are equally important. I think we recently did a study for an insurance firm and we interviewed the C-suite, CEO and CFO. It was very interesting in terms of diagnostic what they gave us. So they considered the operator of HR, they considered as a hygiene, quote unquote. So I saw the first time ever that I would see a business coin HR operations stuff as hygiene, but the business have continued to rise up in terms of expectations. They consider the transactional stuff almost free as hygiene. So the comment was the hygiene is done relatively well, but what they want as a project leader is to step up to look from a strategic, more macro lens. That's the value for HR to the organization. And so the operator, in order for that to work, yes, you would need technology-led enablement. So if your technology is still using Excel, not that it doesn't work, you would need to ensure that you're thinking about the roadmap in terms of how do you leverage most from your technology kind of investments, what's the roadmap going to look like for you in order to drive operational effectiveness. And through that comes structure, responsibilities, and role realignment as well. And so with that as a backdrop, as a project leader, yes, you can drive successful initiatives for leveraging some important drivers as well. One of the other interesting phenomena we're seeing, we've helped a lot of organizations like Lenovo. Lenovo is a classic example where it is a Chinese company caught the world by storm, acquiring IBM, the PC business, now doing extremely well in terms of the PC market. It was a business that IBM, where I worked, the PC business was actually very, very loss-making. It's a unit that they didn't want. But they found the perfect synergy in terms of how it works for Lenovo. Lenovo has done relatively well in terms of integrating the business. You heard about Motorola. That's now the integration in progress. But one of the key enablers was they had a very good, also positive cultural mindset. They said, we're going to be one global firm, one global HR in terms of the mindset. I'm going to enable managers to be empowered to drive HR-related matters themselves. They've got a Lenovo Way, which is published as a book in terms of the way they drive the culture. Shared services, they've actually done a lot of implementation and optimization work in order to give them the adequate backbone to have effective line managers out there. So it's very much a empowered, autonomized kind of organization that blends in with the culture. So the new perspective, the future of HR, the role of HR and its effectiveness will, of course, will span multiple constituents, more diverse. And so HR do need to work faster, less bureaucratic, flatter, and be more business relevant. I think that's one of the key highlights to say sometimes HR tends to be very kind of transactional, operational focused, but without that business relevance. So what that really means is the business acumen to be able to step in readily and think like a business. That's what the business expects first and foremost. So you're getting a lot more HR practitioners who are from the business. Some of you may be in that shoes already, in order to really empathize and really have the pulse of the business in check to drive from a HR perspective. And one of the other important things is we have, the last 5 or 10 years have talked about on demand. You want it real time. And so even within Towers Watson, we've actually gotten rid of mid-year appraisals. We said it should be real time, it should be more frequent. We've gotten rid of it, and we just have an annual, but also periodically during the year, as required, the employee is supposed to have those ongoing calibration checks with the managers. That's important. But the other kind of term that we use is the whole, if you're into retailing, like a Walmart, you should have heard of the omni-channel way. So it doesn't matter if you are a store or warehouse, etc. You should have access to see the stock that you want, be it a pair of shoes or whatever product, but that's using omni-channel, meaning basically all types of channel to hit your employees to create that experience. Similarly with HR, you do have slightly older generation that I want to prefer calling a call center for my queries. I don't want to email. I don't want to do anything else. Fine. That's a channel that you have to respect. You may have blue-collar workers. They're not very internet savvy or educated. You need to provide, training for them to help them climb the learning curve. But also then the norm is, can you ask a HR query online? Can you chat with HR? Can you chat with someone virtual? And you get a lot of that experience when you're shopping for something online. Someone pops up there, they ask you, can I help you? So you try to type stuff in. Not long, you actually quickly realize you're probably dealing with a robot. It's not actually a real person. So that's changing the way we do things. I think from a HR perspective, we do absolutely need to think omni-channel, multi-channel, the way we interact with your internal customers and external as well. So in terms of service delivery, what are the things most important? We have a few pillars thinking about it. From a structure, we talked a little bit about that. Whether you have shared services actually is not for every organization. So if you're a small organization, just a few thousand, versus your typical shared services kind of baseline of 10,000 or more, you would look at operational excellence. That's just as relevant. You may look at rationalizing, consolidating, less value-adding services, but yet very critical. You get payroll wrong, you've lost all the credibility to the business. But the ability to streamline, to consolidate, then to outsource, that's going to be very important. There's also a myth that why can't I just outsource this straight away? And I'm hearing that from a lot of clients, but it's not that simple. If your existing processes before you outsource is already complicated, you pass it to an outsourcer, guess what? They're going to charge you an arm and a leg for it because they're dealing with that complexity they don't want to deal with. So definitely rationalize, consolidate, then look at outsourcing potentially. But you should outsource only your non-core activities, less value-adding activities, stuff that's more important to you. Definitely consider kind of keeping it in-house. The way you redefine the role of HR and the managers, I think we talked about the manager kind of effectiveness. The use of technology, mobile technology to optimize the footprint, that's going to be also very much a focus area for the next couple of years. Designing and employing your HR portal is really the final leg where you say you've done a lot of transformations, technology, you look at your people, the process, but finally to put it all together, to hide some messiness and ugliness of some of the other plethora of systems behind the scenes, you should consider using an HR portal that sits on top of everything to make it a lot easier with single sign-on for your employees. And of course, you may wonder, the previous slide said increasing manager effectiveness as number 2, so what's number 1? The number 1 continues to be streamlining processes. In the age of digital disruption, there's so much change imposed upon the business that calls for different ways of engaging, so your process will change as a result. And so a lot of the time, I think organizations miss that step to say, I've done it already 3 years ago, not knowing that the way they conduct the business now is actually could be radically different. Tech sourcing, recruiting, for example, the way you would source the multi or omni-channel way is very different with LinkedIn, etc., how you would do it, versus previously. So that's very important to consider. But a lot of companies, they haven't had the focus to really relook at the process, how it ties in with the delivery model. And so ask yourself a few questions in terms of what you want to do. Whether you need a diagnostic in terms of how much time you're spending, what kind of work and how much time and money you are focusing on activities. We helped a lot of our clients using an activity investment metric tool that to tell them, and we've done that for Lenovo, to say this is exactly how much time and investments of time and money you're spending on all your life cycle activities. And these are the areas in terms of you're spending way too much people effort doing, be it a learning development, be it a recruiting effort. How do you streamline that? But that's a very good kind of baseline setting. What about manager kind of effectiveness training for your managers in terms of allowing them to motivate, allowing them to do the role of HR more effectively? Or are you maximizing HR process efficiency through either employee or manager self-service and ongoing optimization for technology adoption? I think what I'll comment quickly here in terms of the technology landscape, I think whether you're a multinational, the group company have decided to roll out a cloud technology and you've got it, but you don't know how to optimize it. You had very little input in terms of how the system's configured. You've just been thrown this thing to make do what it has. A lot of our clients are going through that phase where a lot of how the system is configured is not Asia friendly. And so we're helping a lot of clients to say, well, how can we help you with adoption? It's great having the state-of-the-art technology, but where adoption is very, very low, that's not going to do any good. Or using that smart technology in terms of your the whole wisdom analogy. How do you actually make good use of your data to become good information for analytical insights? And it starts small. I think there's a myth out there that I need to scorecard to be refreshed with 10 or 20 items, but it's really one item at a time in terms of that step change that may make all the difference at the end. So how about we pause for a time of questions and sure.
If the current state of HR engagement, if current state of HR is bureaucratic and transactional, and there's presumably a maturity phase, how long do you think it's going to take, and what are the stages to a more mature business partner state for HR in that more combination?
So I'll repeat the question too. If HR is currently quite kind of traditional, more bureaucratic, how long it's going to take to really transform to become a true business partner? I think what's important is to try to undo what are those bureaucracies and traditional things in the organization. It could be culture related. It could be the way people are just so entrenched in doing the things. It could actually be in terms of the pillars as you look at, is it a structural issue? Is it a talent issue? How does your talent demographic look like? The way you've done your business or your processes, that may actually be a very bureaucratic way of conducting it, right? We do a swim lane, too many hand-up points, too many people involved, too many workflow approvals. You need to look at all that stuff. So I think underlying in terms of the way you do your process, that could be an issue. Technology that you're using, is it really best in class? Things like that to consider. But the pace of change, I think a lot of organizations right now, they're going through technology-enabled change. They're using technology transformation as an initiative and a lever to drive a lot of changes, because through technology adoption, you definitely should look at your process and it would inform certain thinking in terms of your HR delivery and the people to do it. And this, I'll pause also, this could be questions for both Matthew and myself.
Hi, my name is Michael Wong. I'm from University of Waterloo. I'd like to point back to Matthew's quote that big data will eliminate the middle management layer. So I'd like to hear what your thoughts are on this comment.
I refer to, the middle management layer, I would agree with that, but also just then also said from a HR perspective that if this transformation continued to take shape, a lot of HR middle management could well be obsolete unless they continue to revamp. You think about it, we're pushing from a HR standpoint to the line managers. They're doing more and more of the HR on our behalf. HR, from a partner perspective, is supposed to do more strategic activities, helping the managers to decipher all this data and analytics to make actionable, informed choices. So I would agree in terms of the whole landscape, I think from a macro view, in terms of making the middle management. You don't need them anymore because everything is becoming automated. You've got 3D printers underway. You've got the Internet of Everything being more the norm. And therefore, yes, that's the new way of operating. But from a HR in terms of implications, just as well, I think HR is also being faced with that huge dilemma. How do I add true value to the business? But the good news is a lot of the business in terms of maturity is not quite there yet. It takes time, but it also requires continuous improvement. Now, a lot of organizations are quite fatigued going through transformation. Are we doing that again? Is there another technology? So I think in this age of digital disruption, it's also causing a lot of digital fatigue.
Actually, since I have the microphone, I'll go. And my question is exactly related to your idea of fatigue, because as a manager and as we go through these processes of doing new technology to basically digitize all the processes, a lot of people are going through this cloud fatigue. Okay, it's been 18 months, but guess what? The thing that we just spent all this time learning and changing all our human processes in terms of doing leave requests and doing expenses and all these things that should be automated, and yet 18 months later we will have a new system which is completely different. So how do you deal with that in an organization, that sort of technology fatigue and that sort of restructuring fatigue for either one of you?
I think.
Stick with Cisco.
There you go. All our HR functions, we actually have seen the end of the middle management from HR from our perspective, is that I have everything on my iPhone I can see all of my employees' salary data, I get my budget when I need to give them pay raises, I get automated suggestions of where they should go, I can do all of the ratings, I don't need to go to an office, I don't need to do anything. I think the tools are not that material because they will change as technology changes, but it's more just the desire to engage, because it's got a new tool, a new app, a new everything else. I think we just have to expect that things will change every 18 to 24 months, and you just have to get into that mental mindset, because digitization is here to stay simply because it saves companies a fortune. Yeah. And so it's just one of those things we need to accept.
Yeah, can I ask maybe Jonathan and Matthew both? A lot of the presentation really makes Fortune 500 and big company sorts of things. To what extent can you scale all this down for SMEs and so forth? Not all huge companies, and yet the categories I presume are scalable down as well. And can you make a few comments about that?
I'll start and Matthew, please chime in. I made the point earlier about shared services. If you don't have scale, you do that in a smaller way, be it operational excellence. The whole issue with cloud adoption, it relies on your subscription. So if you don't have massive enough kind of critical footprint, maybe 5,000 or 10,000, it's going to cost you a lot from a per user perspective. And so the question is good. How do I make do on a smaller scale if I'm an SME, kind of category? I think you would actually go through a similar rigor, but you would go through those fine-tuning, and you do keyhole surgery, or you may do radical surgery, depending on the state of maturity of your business. But it's important to look at still that 4 quadrants is a people, process, technology, policies, to make sure you're nimble enough. And I think you should play, if you're an SME, without massive kind of organization footprint, that you're usually a lot more agile and nimble, and you should absolutely play that to your strengths, because you are less likely to be bogged down by your policies and specific way of doing things. And I think that's probably one of the necessity skills, moving forward. But absolutely, you're right. You should still look at all those things in terms of fine-tuning you can do.
I think also from that perspective, Fortune 500 companies are going to have their own applications. Small and medium businesses are going to download their applications from the web, just like it's becoming an app economy. It's just like when people started doing their own personal accounting, they would download Quicken for small companies. Now you're going to have lots of different applications available just to download, just to integrate with all of your data, and to have a generic application. There'll be certain amounts to be customizable, but most of them will be just generic, and people will opt for that because it makes their lives easier.
I'll add a point just now in terms of just, it prompted me to think, because of the SME space, I think that's an untapped area. A lot of corporates, to your point, Matthew, they're now looking at, so first of all, it's data privacy on the cloud. So if they're offering cloud hosting, like a PCCW equivalent, they would be looking to also develop systems to allow to be rolled out using their cloud platform to protect data privacy to SME organizations. But that's very much an untapped area so far.
This is Dominic Yin. I would like to have a question to Mr. Smith. Everybody is talking about smart city. You just mentioned about smart city. I would like to ask whether Hong Kong is too slow to start. Because have you talked to Brenda Au, who is responsible for East Kowloon Smart City, and whether we should, Cisco can help Hong Kong government to start with whole Hong Kong, including Kowloon and new territories, rather than only slowly starting in East Kowloon. And China is started very, very good, but later on very slow and almost stopped. What do you think, and what is your comment? Thank you.
I think Hong Kong is actually very slow to start. A lot of other cities around the world are moving a lot faster. I think a lot of the issues around governments in general being slow to start is the siloed approach. It's not that they don't have plenty of money, it's just that when you silo things too much, we call a smart city when 3 or 4 silos at least would work together, because you're not going to get everything to work together. But all of the technologies are there. I just think it's more of a will to change than anything else. We're seeing Macau as an example move a lot faster simply because it's a little bit smaller. When you go to cities like Sydney as an example, some of them are too big because you have to deal with 10 or 12 city councils. And so you have dozens of silos within 12 different organizations. And so the things that we see moving faster are those cities of around 250,000 people to 1 million, simply because they generally have a little bit more command and control and the ability to make decisions faster. So I think it's not just a Hong Kong issue about moving slowly, it's just a scale issue. And so you need that impetus. And I think also, to your point about East Kowloon, a lot of these things are about trialing solutions that already work. And so when you know it already worked, why not just go for it? Because as soon as you've trialed it for 18 months, it's going to be obsolete anyway.
Well, I have a question for Matthew. I'm very intrigued by the presentation that you gave on everything being connected together by sensors, and you talked about the use of mobile apps in collecting the data so that company can have better insight and therefore take actions based on those insights. So apart from mobile apps, the sensors and the mobiles, are sensors being used in other ways as well? Do you know?
Oh, absolutely. There's smart traffic sensors, so there'll be smart parking. You'll put a sensor in an ambulance. It doesn't need to capture the data, but if there's a patient in the ambulance, it should be able to talk to the traffic lights and say, hey, I'm on the way, please turn green. And when there's no emergencies, these sensors on buses should say, well, there's 70 people on this bus, there's only 2 people in that car, the bus should have priority. So there's going to be a lot more actionable intelligence from the use of sensors that is, it's data you don't have to store, it's just things that you actually use and then discard.
So I heard of people in the shops carrying baskets and they have sensors and they can track where customers go as well. That I think is increasingly being used in some retail shops and etc. So that's an interesting way of using it.
We worked with Walmart and they wanted to know when's the optimal time to have the most people on the cash registers, because if they say they can optimize that, they can make an extra $10 million an hour. And so, after all of that research, the majority of it came down to when was the person going to leave the freezer counter.
Okay, are there any more questions before we bring the seminar to a close? Yeah.
I think one will do. You talked about before, middle management maybe being not needed anymore, actuaries maybe they don't be needed either, things like that. It seems to me they're going to be replaced with a lot of software engineers, software designers, data scientists. Do you think we're training enough people at the moment to be able to maintain that exponential growth you talked about? Just from something I've seen before is with so much data you get a lot of analysis paralysis, and I think some companies are finding it really difficult to find enough talent to really make any insight into the data that they have?
I think if you ask our outgoing CEO what he'd do if he opened a business today, he'd say it'd be an app developer. Because app developers are, the people the Mark Cubans of this world who made billions of dollars as web page developers back in the 90s. Those are the app developers of tomorrow, like WhatsApp being sold for $16 billion. From a data scientist perspective, that is also another great career to get into because there's a huge shortage. In fact, there's a lot of courses in the Bay Area that are actually trying to take people with existing PhDs and just give them basic courses on how to become a data scientist because they already have the research capabilities, but it's how to do that in a digital environment. And so large companies are hoovering up data scientists extremely quickly. I went to visit Xerox in Bangalore last week. They have 50 or 60. And also consultancies like Accenture, who can start to offer data science as a service, are moving very quickly in those areas as well. So I think large companies will take a lot, and then obviously it would be cheaper to outsource to consultants than hire own data scientists in the long run.
Do you think that large companies might try to retrain a lot of their staff to become data scientists?
I don't think so, because the key thing about a data scientist is to take the data and pull it together. But what the large company needs is somebody to state the problem. Because you have to actually understand the business and state the problem, and then you can just state the different data sets, and somebody can then do that work for you. So that, I feel, can be relatively easily outsourced. It is a complex task, but it's more understanding the industry and the business that is, I think, the most crucial task.
I think we are. It's time to bring this seminar to close. And thank you very much, Matthew. Thank you very much, Jonathan, for a very enlightening presentation. I think I've learned a lot personally from this. And just on behalf of AmCham, I would like to present a small gift just to thank you. Right. Just a very short announcement about the next seminar. The next seminar is going to be for the HR community. Is going to be on the 6th of August, and this is going to be a continuation of the topic that we are talking about, which is about analytics. How do we use analytics in HR to help make people decisions? So I hope that some of us here will be able to join the seminar too, and see you soon. Thank you very much.